For a single nickel, the whole room was yours. Watch this glowing machine in the corner of the soda fountain pull your record, drop it, and set it spinning, while everyone waited to hear the song you picked. In a minute, you'll see a rack of little glass tubes on a store counter, beside a machine people used before calling a certain kind of repairman to the house. And later, a boxy camera with a shiny silver bulb the size of a walnut that fired once in a hot, blinding flash and then was finished for good. 20 objects. Keep count of how many you can name before the reveal, and remember the one that brings the whole room back.
Rains back over the grounds and cycles again while that glass knob slowly darkens from clear to deep brown. You watched it to know when the coffee was ready. If you named it already, that's the coffee percolator, the pot that ruled American kitchens through the 1950s and 60s, on the stove, or plugged into the wall. Many people remember that rhythmic bubbling as the first sound of the morning. The automatic drip machine, especially Mr. Coffee in 1972, brewed without boiling the coffee bitter, and the percolator slowly stepped aside. But the sound and the smell are hard to forget for anyone who grew up around one. Here's a rack of small glass tubes on a store counter, next to a metal machine full of sockets and dials. This one stumps almost everyone born later, so if you know it, you truly grew up before 1970. That's a self-service tube tester, and those glass tubes are vacuum tubes. Televisions and radios of the era ran on them, and when the picture went dark, a tube had usually burned out. You'd pull the tubes from the back of the set, carry them to the drugstore or hardware store, and plug them into the tester to find the dead one. If the machine flagged a bad tube, you bought a replacement right there from the cabinet below. Solid-state electronics ended the vacuum tube, and with it, the whole ritual of the tube tester trip and the house call TV repairman. Look at the back wall of this old medicine cabinet. There's a thin slot cut into the metal, sometimes labeled razor blades. If you know where it led, you probably grew up with one. That's a razor blade slot, and it opens straight into the hollow space inside the wall. Men shaved with double-edged safety razors, and dull-used blades were dangerous in the trash where children could find them. So you dropped each old blade through the slot and it fell down between the studs, out of everyone's way for good. Nobody ever emptied it. Cartridge and disposable razors ended loose blades, and new houses dropped the feature. The punchline comes today, when someone renovating opens that wall and finds decades of blades piled inside. Here's a small tool with a crank on the side and a rounded cup at the top, the kind of thing that lived in a kitchen drawer. Turn the crank, and 2 whisks spin. That's the rotary egg beater. No electricity, just gears, and your own arm turning steadily to beat eggs or whipped cream. It sat in most kitchens right beside the flour sifter and the potato masher. Making a cake meant real work, cranking until the batter was smooth. Electric hand mixers and stand mixers gradually took over the job. The beater didn't disappear so much as retire to the back of the drawer, and if you ever used one, your arm remembers exactly how it felt. Getting a clear picture out of this often meant standing perfectly still, holding 2 thin metal rods at just the right angle, while everyone else shouted, "There! Hold it right there!" You already know this is the television antenna, either the rooftop aerial or the tabletop rabbit ears on top of the set. You angled and extended them for each channel, and when the picture still rolled, someone might wrap the tips in foil for a little more reception. This was simply how nearly every home received broadcast TV for decades. Cable, then satellite, then the digital transition changed it all. But the real memory is the family argument over who had to stand and hold the antenna during the best part of the show. Here's a black box on a stand outside a store with a hinged door and a place to insert coins. Step inside, pull the door shut, and you had a little private room in public. That's the telephone booth. Before phones lived in pockets, a call away from home meant finding a booth or a payphone, dropping in a dime, and dialing. The folding door gave you a moment of privacy on a busy street. For decades, these stood on corners, in stations, and outside stores, a small piece of everyday city and small-town life. Mobile phones made them obsolete, and they vanished so completely that younger viewers often only know them from old movies. But if you ever pulled that door shut behind you, you remember the muffled quiet inside. Now look at the wall of this house. There's a small metal door built right into it, with a second little door on the inside. It isn't a mailbox and it isn't a vent. That's the milk chute, or milk door. In many homes into the 1960s, milk arrived from a delivery man who set glass bottles in the chute from outside, so the family could lift them out from inside, often before anyone was awake. You might remember cold bottles waiting there at breakfast, cream risen to the top, with empties and a note left out for the next round. Supermarkets and home refrigeration ended most delivery, and today people find these little doors painted shut in old houses. Here's a school desk with a hole in the top corner, and set into that hole is a small round well. It isn't for a cup. That's the inkwell desk. In older classrooms, before ballpoint pens were everywhere, students wrote with pens dipped in ink, and the inkwell held the supply. The wooden desks, often bolted to the floor in rows, had a well built right into the corner. If you sat at one, you may remember the smell of the ink, the scratch of a nib, and the constant worry of a blot or a spill. Cheap, reliable ballpoint pens made dipping obsolete, and modern furniture replaced the old bolted-down desks. But that little round hole is instantly familiar to anyone who used one. Here's a heavy object with a wheel of finger holes on the front. You didn't press it. You pulled the wheel around and waited for it to spin back before the next number. That's the rotary dial telephone, often the Western Electric Model 500, and at its peak, it was the standard phone in most homes with a landline. Most families leased it from the phone company, which is why so many looked identical. There was usually just one, tied to the wall by a coiled cord. Someone was always stretching around a doorway. Touch-tone dialing arrived in the 60s, and eventually cordless and mobile phones ended it, but that whirring dial return still lives in a lot of memories. Here's a simple boxy camera, and screwed into the top is a shiny silver bulb the size of a walnut. That bulb only worked once. That's a camera with a flash bulb, like the popular Kodak Brownie and Instamatic models of the era. Before electronic flashes, each photo taken indoors needed a fresh flashbulb that fired in a single bright hot burst, and then was spent. You'd pop out the used one, sometimes still warm, and screw in a new one for the next shot. Family gatherings meant a pocket full of bulbs and a camera that could only manage one flash picture at a time. Built-in electronic flashes made single-use bulbs unnecessary, and film itself eventually gave way to digital. But that hot little bulb, and the spots it left in your eyes, is a real memory for many. Here's a machine on the classroom wall, near the door, with a crank handle on the side and a little drawer underneath. There was almost always a short line waiting to use it. That's the hand crank pencil sharpener. You slid your pencil into the hole, turned the crank, and felt the resistance ease as the point came sharp. The shavings collected in the pull-out drawer that someone was always forgetting to empty. Sharpening a pencil meant a small trip across the room, and that familiar grinding sound, sometimes drawn out just to stretch a break from the lesson. Electric sharpeners and mechanical pencils reduced the need for it. But that grinding crank is a sound anyone who sat in those classrooms will recognize at once. This came out on one day of the week, and it worked with a hot iron. A slim bottle, often ceramic, with a sprinkler head on top, and sometimes a painted face. That's the laundry sprinkler bottle. Before wash-and-wear fabrics and steam irons, cotton clothes needed dampening to press out the wrinkles. You'd shake water across a shirt, roll it up so the moisture spread evenly, then iron it smooth. Many people remember ironing as its own weekly ritual, a basket of sprinkled, rolled clothes waiting beside the board. Steam irons and easy care synthetics made the sprinkler unnecessary, but plenty of viewers can still picture it sitting there on the ironing board. Here's a low wooden cabinet, long and heavy, the kind of thing that looks like furniture. Lift the lid though, and there's a turntable inside. That's the console stereo, or hi-fi cabinet, usually with an AM/FM radio and speakers built in, often the centerpiece of the living room, and topped with a lamp and a doily. You stacked records on the spindle, and they dropped one at a time to play. On a slow Sunday, the whole room organized itself around the music from that cabinet. Component systems and then portable audio made furniture-sized stereos obsolete, but many can still picture the clunk as the next record dropped onto the platter. Here's a tall, glowing machine standing in the corner of a diner or drugstore soda fountain with rows of buttons and a slot for coins. Feed it a nickel and it played your choice out loud for everyone. That's the jukebox, loaded with 45 RPM records. You'd flip through the little title cards, pick a song, drop in your coin, and watch the mechanism pull your record and set it spinning. For teenagers especially, it was how you shared music in public. Gathering at the soda fountain around a jukebox was a genuine social event of the era. Radio, then cheap home stereos, then digital music everywhere made the coin-fed jukebox rare. But if you ever picked a song and waited for it to play, you remember the small thrill of hearing your choice fill the room. Here's a machine with a tub and 2 rollers mounted right on top. A younger viewer might guess a pasta maker. It's neither. This is the wringer washing machine, still common in many homes, and especially rural ones, into the 1960s. After washing, you fed each piece of clothing by hand between the rollers to squeeze the water out before hanging it up to dry. It came with a rule every family repeated, because the rollers didn't know the difference between a shirt and a hand. Keep fingers and hair well clear. The automatic washer's spin cycle wrung clothes for you, faster and far safer. Anyone who used one still remembers being warned about those rollers. Here's a set of small plastic or mesh cylinders, along with a scattering of hairpins, spread out on a bathroom counter. They came out the night before something important. Those are hair rollers, or curlers, and the pins that held them. To set a hairstyle before electric styling tools were common, women rolled sections of hair onto the curlers and pinned them, often sleeping in them overnight, so the curls would hold by morning. Many people remember how uncomfortable it was to sleep in a head full of rollers, and the ritual of setting them before church or a special day. Blow dryers, hot rollers, and modern styling tools changed the whole routine, but that image of a head wrapped in curlers is a familiar one to a generation. Simple wooden pins clipped over a line strung across the backyard. There's a smell people still chase, and these are what made it possible. Those are wooden clothespins, and in the 1960s plenty of homes had no dryer, so the clothesline was how the wash got dry. You may remember the snap of the spring, the basket of pins on the ground, and towels that came off the line stiff and smelling of sun and fresh air. Affordable electric dryers changed all of it, along with smaller yards and, in some places, rules against visible laundry lines. The pin never fully disappeared, but the daily ritual did. That outdoor smell is one thing no dryer sheet has ever matched. Here's a smooth wooden shape, a bit like an egg, sometimes a mushroom with a handle. A younger viewer might guess a toy. If you know it, you were raised to fix things. That's the darning egg. When a sock got a hole, you didn't throw it out, you mended it. You slipped the wooden egg inside to stretch the fabric taut and smooth, then wove thread across the hole until it was closed. It lived in the sewing basket beside a favorite chair, and darning was often an evening task by lamplight. Cheap, plentiful clothing made mending socks not worth the time, but it's a small window into a whole way of living built around repair rather than replacement. Here's a heavy metal machine on a desk with a bank of number keys, a crank or a bar on the side, and a roll of paper feeding out the top. This is not a typewriter. That's the adding machine. Before electronic calculators, offices and shops added long columns of figures on one of these. You punched in the numbers, pulled the handle or pressed the bar, and the machine printed each entry and the total onto a paper tape you could keep as a record. Bookkeepers, shopkeepers, and clerks spent whole days at these, and the clatter of keys and the ratchet of the handle were the sound of an office. Electronic calculators, cheaper and silent, made them obsolete almost overnight. But that printed paper tape is a familiar sight to anyone who worked with figures back then. Stay up late enough and something strange used to happen. Television itself would end for the night. First, the national anthem played, then a circular pattern with a drawing of a headdress filled the screen, and after that, nothing but hissing snow until morning. That's the Indian head test pattern and the old sign-off ritual. In the 1950s and 60s, stations didn't broadcast around the clock. When programming ended, they played the anthem, put up a test pattern that helped calibrate the picture, and went silent for the night. Picture falling asleep on the couch with the set still on and waking to a screen full of static, the surest proof you'd made it to the very end of the broadcast day. 24-hour programming, then cable and digital, ended the nightly sign-off for good. It captures a gentler pace, a time when even the television went to sleep. If you knew most of these, you almost certainly grew up before 1970. None of them became strange because they were badly made. They became strange because the routines around them quietly changed, one convenience at a time. The tube tester gave way to solid-state sets, the milk door to the supermarket, the adding machine to a silent calculator. The objects slipped out of our homes and classrooms, but the memories attached to them stayed right where they were. So, how many did you recognize before the reveal? And which one brought the whole room back? Leave it below, and if this took you back, consider subscribing for the next trip through the everyday past.